out there, uh, getting used to the news system that we're on. Today's topic is going to be something I think a little bit of a precedent that we need to discuss, and it's something that our federal government apparently does not have the conviction that they feel they need to know about foreign policy anymore. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or a moderate and independent, regardless of your political affiliation, I think we can all agree that this current American administration is nothing but a failure in terms of foreign policy. So today's discussion is going to be over the current Israel Iranian standoff. I think the importance of this lies not in what is currently happening, but where we've got to where we are now and effectively how we've gotten to this point. Um, we must remember that Iran Israel conflict is nothing new. It's been going on for thousands of years now. This thing is nothing new except to Americans who all of a sudden, after 200 years, have jumped onto the scene. And we're trying to figure out the best way to interact foreign policy wise with these two nations. As a Christian country founded on Judeo Christian values and the religious beliefs of Judeo Christianity, we like to think that we ally ourselves with Israel and that Israel is our greatest ally. Therefore, we shouldn't stick to anybody else's interests except Israel's. Recently, with the protests and all the free speech issues going on with Palestinian pro Palestine movements here in the United States, we're seeing kind of a paradigm shift in the younger generations moving over to a more Palestinian approach to things. I will say that President Eisenhower, many of you may recall, is my favorite president. There is a prime reason for that. Eisenhower did not take anything but an even handed approach to both sides. We look at the Suez Crisis, America had navigated that perfectly, never got involved, even if it meant jeopardizing relations with its allies in Europe. We still managed to avoid a war and maintain good relations with everybody. And that was kind of the run of the gambit, was we were experimenting to see if America ever had to jump into the foreign policy scene. Today, uh, apparently the most conservative thing any Republican in Congress can do is print another $2 trillion to go into another war that, frankly, nobody in the United States wants to get into. And this is just the way things roll when you have people who are inept and fail to understand the simplicities of foreign policy and understand that these things have been going on for centuries. It's nothing new to anybody except us. And the only day that we're going to run the risk of having war is when we have those people who are not adaptable to changing environments and foreign policy. So, where do we start from here? This is a big issue. There's a lot of past things. I want to put the blame squarely at the foot of the American administration, not just Joe Biden, but we can go back to the one fault that I believe President Eisenhower made in the 50s and the many faults that Ronald Reagan made in policy with the Iranians. So, how did Iran get to where it is today? Well, let's start from where we are now and kind of work our way back. I find the best way to tell a story is to start with the end and work our way back to the beginning, filling in the holes in the middle. So, an article from CNN had come out. Many of you know that I might not trust CNN to be the best news source, but when it comes to world events, it doesn't really matter. What you're going to get is the American side of things. Iran accuses Israel of killing Iranian military commanders and others in an airstrike in a consulate in Syria. So this is where it all started. This is where Iran was kind of pushing for a revamped approach, a vengeance strike, if you will. Top Iranian military commanders were among 7 Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps officials killed in an airstrike on the country's consulate building in Damascus, Syria, according to Iranian officials and state-affiliated media, which had blamed Israel for the attack. Now, the Iranian consulate comes out and says the building next to the embassy was the consulate, and it was targeted by 6 missiles from Israeli F-35 warplanes. The Israeli Defense Forces spokesman, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, came out and said, according to our intelligence, This is no consulate and this is no embassy. I repeat, this is no consulate, this is no embassy. This is a military building of Quds forces disguised as a civilian building in Damascus. When asked if Israel was involved in the attack, Hagari said, "I'm not going to comment on that strike, but I want to tell you in the last 6 months, Iran is making this region escalate. She's the main actor. Iran is the main actor that makes atrocities in this region using the proxies in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen." Now, I don't know if anybody remembered the last episode that we did on Iranian and Afghan influences and how the United States is to blame for those regimes collapsing. But I want you to remember back to these four countries: Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. The United States is the only country in the Middle East, and I mean that seriously. The United States is the only country in the Middle East that has waged war in all four of these countries simultaneously. So just keep that in the back of your head, especially Lebanon. We're going to see where that plays in a minute. So, from Iran Primer, which is kind of a website for all things Iran's military analysis, they had April 12th, 2024, a report come out titled Iran's Ballistic Missile Program, where they had said most of these were acquired from post Soviet sources, North Korea, the former Soviet Union, the former Soviet Socialist republics. Most of their ballistic missile programs, it says it blames accuracy as the reason that they can't really use these ballistic missiles. And primarily, this is all from books that have come out prior in the 90s and the 2000s that said most of the future wars that Iran will get into will be fought with drones. So we've seen this coming for 20 years. We've seen the current state of what they were going to do. We even saw the buildup 2 days in advance, just like we saw the buildup 2-3 weeks in advance with Russia on the border with Ukraine, and yet nobody did anything. Nobody called Russia out in the UN and said, "Hey, what are these guys doing over here?" These things are to blame for nothing but a lapse of judgment and a lapse of foreign policy initiative on the United States part. And I mean that very seriously. I love being an American citizen. I have no allegiance to anybody but my country. I have unequivocal allegiance to America first, not to a political party, not to a candidate, not to anybody but the United States. But we have nobody to blame but ourselves for not putting at least an intelligence perspective on the Russo-Ukrainian war. And just like the Iranian buildup, days before that they had ever struck Israel, nobody ever called them out in the press, the news, and said, "Well, look, these guys are building up drones. These guys are building up forces on the border. We might need to do something." More than 300 here, according to the New York Times article I've got here. The United States was even part of shooting some of them down with the ships in the Gulf, there in the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean Sea. So we knew this was going to happen. Joe Biden had allowed the UN sanctions on the Iranian missile programs and stuff like that to, matter of fact, expire before this attack ever took place. And those sanctions that were put on the Iranians for ballistic missile programs, there were stipulations in there for drones as well. But yet the United States never took the initiative to come up to the UN and say, "Well, we don't really want Iran building up drones or ballistic missiles in the region. We might need to come and build up a better policy initiative with the UN Security Council." They've had the time. We've had 3 years of this degenerate, degraded administration. Nobody went to the UN. Nobody went to lobby Congress to say, "Look, we know the policy reports from 30 years ago say they've got these drones, they've got factories working on them. We know that the liquid fuel for their ballistic missiles is limited." And yet nobody took the initiative to get up and elaborate that we needed the policy shift towards restructuring the sanctions, towards amending them, reinstating them. And not only that, but we unfroze their assets, $100 billion of them, matter of fact, in the U.S. market and around the world. We allowed the unfreezing measures to go off. Iran got all that money back. Not only that, but they got $10 billion from this incompetent administration as well before the attacks. So keep in mind that not only do they get expired sanctions, but the U.S. has given them money as well, or has. So keep that in the back of your mind. The Iran nuclear deal was an utter failure. It gave Iran all the resources. It gave them scientists to help them build up nuclear energy for peacetime purposes. Where do you think they're getting, the improved science to build these missiles, these drones from? From U.S. researchers and from people that were sent over there from the UN Security Council and the International Atomic Energy Agency. So this had come out on April 2nd, 2024. Tehran vows response after strike blamed on Israel destroyed Iran's consulate. So we seem to be noticing a trend here. So a lot of folks are going to call me anti-Israel for this. I'm not. I'm a critical thinker. I believe in examining all of our research, all of our policy platforms from the past to determine why we are the way we are in the world today. Now, I hope everybody kept in mind the whole thing about Libya, or Lebanon, I should rather say. Everybody might be wondering, well, what's Jake getting into? Well, I'm pulling up the articles that we discussed last time that we lectured on this subject. Dealing with Iran, how experts see it. President Reagan's decision to authorize unpublicized talks with Iranian officials and send them some weapons and spare parts has touched off a major dispute involving United States foreign policy and has promoted a heated debate that has transcended the usual partisan divisions. Mr. Reagan has angrily denied reports that he traded arms for American hostages held in where? Lebanon by what? Pro-Iranian militants. So this isn't the first time we've had this situation, and it could very well be set up again to do the exact same thing. Why? Because the military-industrial complex loves nothing more than another war, another money grab, and another effort to undermine the stock market and pin it all on wartime economics instead of peacetime economics. We haven't had a peacetime economy in 70 years, mind you. It wasn't since the 1950s that we actually had peace in this country. Now, Shaul Bakash, who was a professor of government at George Mason University, comments, for the U.S. government that has made the foundation of its policy not to bargain with hostage takers, trading arms for hostages is not a very wise policy. Now, keep in mind, this is the same administration. Reagan and Carter both had sent weapons to mujahideen groups in Iran and Lebanon and Syria and Yemen and Afghanistan in an effort to overthrow those regimes that we thought were such bad news. Now, what we're going to notice with this same report is the CIA comes out and praises it. The benefits are simple. It gets back American citizens who have been taken by individuals who have their own agenda. Richard Helms, former CIA director and ex-ambassador to Iran. R.K. Ramazani from the University of Georgia. This report came out in the 80s, mind you. The greatest concern I have is that this is going to prejudice our chances of improving a relationship in Iran in non-strategic areas because it has put an egg on the face of moderates, and now the moderates will go out of their way to distance themselves from us. Well, who comes next but Stansfield Turner, former CIA director? I'm persuaded that this is primarily a swap of arms for hostages. So, there were other people in this report that came out. Stanfield had praised it. The Reagan administration, of course, in this same report, has not confirmed or denied reports that the U.S. may have supplied Iran with U.S.-made arms in exchange for Tehran's cooperation in freeing hostages held by pro-Iran extremists. Well, this same situation, if I'm not mistaken, was going on in Israel and Gaza and Lebanon long before this missile strike happened. And here we see the exact same article almost coming out in 1986 when President Reagan gave Iran weapons, literally gave them strategic field missiles. So keep this in mind. And of course, there are several groups that are coming out saying, well, this could be the spark, the big spark of the powder keg in the Middle East because Jordan is now coming out and helping Israel. You have people that have primarily for the last 5,000 years of history have stayed out of relations with the people of Israel, the Jewish people. And now they're coming in to take Israel's side on things. Even Saudi Arabia has kind of taken Israel's side on this. So this leaves us in a place of where do we go from here? Well, to know where we have to go, we have to know where we've been, right? So let's take a look at why policy failed in the Middle East and why policy has continued to fail in Iran is because when we had the chance to, and we're going to critique Israel's policy here in a minute, and I'm going to show you why I think the drones or the 6 F-35s that Israel had sent up to Damascus was kind of ironic to me in two different ways. So let's start with Mohammad Mossadegh. I have nothing against the guy personally. I don't think he was really a communist, as the CIA believed that he was. Then again, the Dulles brothers would do anything for more military money. So this comes from the Mohammad Mossadegh Project, a project that is run in memoriam of the former prime minister, who was their last democratically elected prime minister, by the way. This was Mohammad Mossadegh's final message to President Eisenhower, and it was written May 28th of 1953. We're not going to read the whole thing, but he goes on to say, in the message which Secretary of State John Foster Dulles sent me from Karachi, he expressed regret that the efforts of the United States to contribute to the solution of the problem of compensation had thus far been unsuccessful. It should be recalled that the Iranian government was prepared to pay the value of the former company, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. I'm going to get into that in a second. For their former company's properties in Iran in such amount as it was determined by the International Court of Justice. It was also prepared to accept the jurisdiction of the said court with regard to the amount of compensation, provided the British government would state the amount of its claims in advance, and that claim would be within the bounds of reason. Mossadegh continues, there can be serious consequences from an international viewpoint as well if the situation is permitted to continue. If prompt and effective aid is not given to this country, Iran, now, any steps that might be taken tomorrow to compensate for the negligence of today might well be too late. So it goes on, a memorandum from the Near Eastern South Asian Secretary of State Henry Bayrodi to John Foster Dulles. There were several principal points that Bayrodi had come out and said, an expression of grave concern over the probable consequences of a further deterioration of financial and economic situations in Iran, which deterioration can be reversed only by A, the removal of obstacles for the sale of oil, or B, increased economic aid from the United States. So what did the United States do? First of all, let's discuss why Mossadegh was asking for help. During the 1950s, Iran post-war had experienced a financial collapse. Now, this wasn't due to anything but imperialist policies from Great Britain, who, being the prime reason that we didn't get into the Suez Crisis or the 6 Days War. Iran, the majority of their oil market was governed by one corporation, one monopoly, and it was a subsidization of the British state, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. So Mohammad Mossadegh passed an initiative, a direct order from his office, the prime minister's office, ordering the legislature of Iran, ordering Iran to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and saying, effectively, the oil that you've been pulling out of Iran, we're not a British Commonwealth anymore. You have no power over us as a Commonwealth, as a state under the control of the crown of the British Empire anymore. It's time we stop giving away our oil for free. So effectively what was happening was, let's compare this closer to home to the United States and Mexico. If you imagine Mexico being Iran and the United States being the United States and the British being the British, let's say the British had a capital over the oil market in Mexico, and the United States effectively, was just playing the part. We get the oil from the British, which was where most of our oil had come from in the 1950s. Now, let's say an independent country was told by a foreign government, you can't control your own oil because we kind of have a contract from the imperialist days that we still can control your oil. So the only way that Iran is getting their oil back is from buying it from the British. But wait, isn't it Iran's oil to begin with? Well, Mohammad Mossadegh's essential goal here was to nationalize the oil industry so that they could tax oil exports. Seems reasonable enough. You want compensation. Everybody wants to get paid for their resources that another country is taking. Matter of fact, that is why we kind of fought against the British too at some point in history. It seems like even in the 1950s, we forgot where we came from in this country. So imagine the British doing this to the United States today. The British comes over and tells us, well, we have a monopoly on your oil in Texas. Texas isn't getting a drop of that oil until we take it, refine it in Britain, and send it back to you. And then we'll charge Texas to get its oil back. You imagine the fit and the uproar that Texas would be in. Well, if this sounds like pro-Iranian sentiments to you, it's not. It's saying we had the chance to deliver a better deal than we've got now, and we're stuck with the consequences of an 80-year-old failing policy because we failed to adapt and understand the problems of the past. So Iran is getting charged to get their oil back because naturally the British pump it out of the ground. They take it to the refineries in Britain or wherever else in the empire that they have it, and they sell the oil right back to the Iranians. Mohammed Mossadegh said, let's just cut out the middleman. Let's have Iran nationalize the oil industry. Let's tax the exports. The British can keep all that they want. They can export as much as they want. And we'll use that to build up the economy of Iran so that we can build public schools, hospitals, public office space, build up a state of civilization, much like, the United States taxing people for gas to build the highways, which was done in the 50s under Eisenhower as well. So what does President Eisenhower respond with? President Eisenhower's response: I received your letter of May 28th in which you described the present difficult situation in Iran and expressed the hope that the United States might be able to assist Iran in overcoming some of its difficulties. Imagine, if you will, a universe where Iran came to the United States for help and said, can you simply tell your buddy to stop stealing my oil? We're not getting any money. We're having to buy it back. Our economy is in shambles. We can't afford to buy our own oil back from the people taking it. Imagine, if you will, a universe where they come to the United States for help with that. A government that, by the way, fought off the British, fought off the tyranny of people taking our labor, taking our resources, and giving us no representation. Iran was in the same boat in 1953. Eisenhower goes on, they sincerely hope that Iran will be able to maintain its independence and that the Iranian people will be successful in realizing their national aspirations and in developing a contented and free nation which will contribute to the world prosperity and peace. The failure of Iran and the UK to reach an agreement with regard to compensation, getting the money, nationalizing and taxing the exports is what he means, has handicapped the government of the United States in its efforts to help Iran. Well, no, what was really going on was the British had twisted the arm of the Americans and said, you might need to get the CIA involved. We've got proof that this guy is a communist, which there was never any definite proof of wiretaps or letters or anything going back between Iran and the Soviet Union that would have proved that. What really happened was the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company in 1953 reached out to the British and said, hey, unless you want the British oil supply to dry up, you're going to want to get the United States involved on our side. Remember, they're our daughter, our child. So stick with us. After this next segment, we'll be right back to discuss the precedents of where this leaves us today. God bless you. Stick with us.
Hey, travelers, do you want to save money on your next flight? Then pick up the phone and call. That's right, call, because the best prices are not online. They're with SmartFares. See, SmartFares has special deals with the airlines. When they have unsold seats, they use SmartFares to fill them. So you get airline tickets at ridiculously low prices. Our prices are too low to publish online. With the extra money you'll save, you can book another trip or treat yourself to dinner or shopping. So stop searching all of those travel sites to find the lowest price on your next flight. Let one of our SmartFares expert travel agents find ridiculously low prices for you. Call SmartFares today and get the best price on your next flight. Guaranteed. Also, save up to 50% off business and first class tickets.
855-325-1820. 855-325-1820. That's 855-325-1820.
Let's be honest, wheelchairs are heavy, bulky, and ugly. Introducing the Feather Chair Wheelchair. Order yours today and get a free wheelchair case, a $50 value. The world's lightest wheelchair is just $4.99 with easy payments as low as $16 a month. Sorry, no Medicare or insurance accepted. So call right now to order yours.
800-823-5826. That's 800-823-5826.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Welcome back, Johnson County, to today's episode of Let Freedom Ring. Glad you're back with us for the second segment. Before we get started, we'd like to say that Joco Community Radio is proud to be a member of EMG, a radio and podcast collective, proudly serving communities like Johnson and Tarrant County, Texas. We're live 365 on the TuneIn Radio Network and on our station app. I highly recommend it. Check out our lineup and more at tuneinjoco.com. We thank our valued partners in helping us amplify the voices of our communities, namely Lone Star Patriots, for making episodes like this possible. Lone Star Patriots is a grassroots local conservative group founded here locally in Burleson, allowing you to meet the candidates, getting you out for great events to take part in creating conservative values and atmosphere of dialogue between the people and their government. LoneStarPatriots.com is the website to go to, LoneStarPatriots.com. If you'd like to get more involved in local politics or even attend one of the small local meetings that they have, reach out to them, look at the website, and take a look for yourself at how you can get involved as well. You heard the commercials. Be sure to connect with Todd Hurd and Associates, attorneys at law. Use code JOCO2024 for 25% off your first order at thetiffy.com. And join the Swipe Nation today and save on your credit card processing at swipenationusa.com. Locally owned and operated. Reach out to Tiffany at jo.co at jococommunityradio.com for advertising rates as low as $50 a month. So we left off last time kind of discussing how the U.S. left Iran hanging back when they had a democratic government. A lot of people today are biased and prejudiced in this country. I mean, prejudices in the worldview that we're given from the federal government in our schools. Many of us grew up, even the boomers grew up, believing that Iran was this god-awful dictatorship of religious extremism, that they even hate the Muslims in other countries. True, they gave weapons to groups in Lebanon and Yemen and Afghanistan. Well, according, to several other reports that the CIA had, Bill Gertz wrote one, Angolan Afghan guerrillas to receive Stinger missiles from who? The United States. The one that we discussed, the United States giving weapons to Iran themselves. Mind you, that was 1986. President Ronald Reagan was giving weapons just directly to the Ayatollah. So I'm here to tell you the situation where we are today. The hate between Israel and Iran has been going on for generations. It's not going to stop anytime soon. But the 50s was the only time that we ever had peace, really, relatively, between Iran and Israel. Why? Because go back and look. I urge you, Iran's government was a monarchy. You might be thinking, there's no way. For 4,000 years before the 1950s coup, which threw their last democratically elected prime minister out of office, Iran was a representative government. Go back and look at the clothing. It wasn't all, Muslim extremism that was driving all these restrictive laws on what people could wear, what women could look like. The protesters in the streets getting killed didn't happen in the 50s. Mohammad Mossadegh was elected by his people. He worked with the parliament. The Shah of Iran, the king, had good relationships with Israel. Matter of fact, he and Israel, in the report here on Israel's ballistic missile program, or Iran's ballistic missile program, they got help from the Israelis to build ballistic missiles. Why? Because the sanctions didn't allow them to go to the Soviet Union. They really wanted help from the United States to fight off the extreme groups that were trying to get into power. Iran had civil conflict going on way before the Civil Revolution. The economy was in shambles, and the United States set them aside and said, we don't really want to help. Well, there are times when foreign aid, there's times when giving money to other countries could build relationships, but we have to be careful about how we play that game, just like getting into wars. So let's cover so far where we've gotten in this story. We covered that Iran had an elected government at some point in its history, 70 years ago. They had a shambles of an economy. The money that was being taken by the oil, the British were reaping it and selling the oil back to Iran. Iran couldn't get any of that money to build its schools and stuff. So they approached the United States and said, you've worked with the British for 200 years. Can you help us? Can you, as the world's superpower today, who won World War II, has the biggest economy on the face of the earth, can you help us? At least twist your buddy's arm. Let him get rid of these sanctions. Let us have our money. We'll pay whatever is necessary to have our own oil back, to have our own industry. We just need to build schools and hospitals. We just need to build infrastructure. And the United States rejected it. Instead, we were turning all of our attention to Egypt with Nasser. That's right. Building up Egypt. It's people who didn't even want our help, who were grabbing us by the crotch and then teasing us. Egypt didn't have any clear policy objectives. They just wanted handouts. Iran was asking for help. They said, we want to work with you. We rejected it. So that leads us where? To the British coming to the United States, saying, the CIA, we've got some proof that this guy's a communist. And if you know what's good for you, you're going to get him out of office. So what happened? We blackmailed Mossadegh, the democratically elected prime minister of Iran, and told him, you're going to leave, you're going to pack your things up and get out of Dodge. We're going to have somebody come hit you. You will die. We will take the Shah out too. If the Shah doesn't take our side, then we'll get him too. So Mossadegh leaves office, and where does this leave us? The 1960s and 1970s revolution in Iran. The beginning of who stepped in? But the Ayatollah. Who'd we give weapons to in 1986 from President Reagan? The Ayatollah. So this lapse of foreign policy doesn't just start today. The reason Iran hates us is because we have an extremist group of religious extremists, Ayatollahs and his children, that have gotten into office that hate the United States. Iran never hated the United States in the 50s. They came to us asking for help, matter of fact. We rejected them. So now we turn our critiques to Israel a little bit. Anybody remember the Lavon affair? So this is, I'm not saying I'm against Israel. I'm saying I'm against bureaucrats in the deep state in every country's government that seeks to use the friendship of the United States and other governments for nothing more than diabolical purposes to get us into war so that they can make money, so that they can take away freedoms while we're in a state of constant fear and we're in a state of going over and dying. The youth are dying in all of these proxy wars. Somebody's making scratch. The congressmen are getting paid off. Their campaigns are getting bankrolled. The military-industrial complex just makes more money. You want to look at how the stock market's been booming for the last 70 years in this country? Look at every time frame that there's been a war and look at the stocks jump. Go down to Lockheed. Go down to Boeing. Look in times of war. Look at the stocks just jump, baby. And when those military industrial complex companies threaten that they're going to be lost, oh, it's just a giant checkbook scheme. Let's write off the bail money as more profit. Look at those stocks just go on up. And who compensates it? We, by printing more money. So let's look at what the deep state was doing in Israel at this time. The Levant affair was a failed Israel covert operation, codenamed Operation Susanna, conducted in Egypt in the summer of 1954. Isn't this after conditions in Iran had deteriorated? So Iran wouldn't have backed Israel and the United States if they wanted to. There was a time when they would have. A year after Iran's government got thrown out. As part of a false flag operation, a group of Egyptian Jews were recruited by Israeli military intelligence to plant bombs inside Egyptian, American, and British-owned civilian targets. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Didn't I just see that somewhere? Let's look at this again. You won't see this on the real news. According to our intelligence, there is no consulate and no embassy. This is no consulate, no embassy. This is a military building of Quds forces disguised as a civilian building in Damascus. Israeli Defense Forces spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari told CNN. CNN could not verify the claim. I wonder why they couldn't verify it. Can't you just go look at wreckage and see if there was military documents and stuff? Wait a minute. That was the article that came out a few weeks ago from 6 Allied F-35 striking a supposedly a civilian disguised building to plant bombs inside Egyptian, American, and British-owned civilian targets, cinemas, libraries, and American education centers. The bombs were timed to detonate several hours after closing time. The attacks were to be blamed on the Muslim Brotherhood, Egyptian communists, unspecified malcontents, and local nationalists, with the aim of creating a climate of sufficient violence and instability to induce the British governments to retain its occupying forces in Egypt's Suez Canal zone. The operation caused no casualties among the population, but resulted in the death of 4 operatives. The overseer of the operation allegedly informed the Egyptians, after which 11 suspected operatives were arrested. 2 killed themselves, and 2 were executed by Egyptian authorities. 2 of them were acquitted at trial. The remaining 5 sentenced to 7 years in prison. In the summer of 1954, Colonel Benjamin Ghibli, the chief of Israel's military intelligence directorate, Amman, initiated Operation Susanna in order to reverse the decision of the U.S. working with Egypt. The goal of the operation was to carry out bombings and other acts of sabotage in Egypt with the aim of creating an atmosphere in which British and American opponents of British withdrawal from Egypt would be able to gain the upper hand and block the British withdrawal from Egypt. So the bombs were planted to keep Allied soldiers there to fight the Egyptians, to dupe the Allies to getting into a war in the Middle East with Egypt? Wait, wasn't there a bombing or a missile attack at the Iranian consulate in Damascus a few days ago? My goodness. It's almost like the deep state is at work again with the same tactics that they used back in 1954 once they ruined relations with Iran for good. I didn't see Iran anymore in the last 70 years asking the U.S. for help. Have you guys? But I see a heck of a lot of places in the Middle East getting blown up, blaming terrorist groups, and our supposed allies, the deep state infiltrates, are coming out and saying, oh my gosh, we've gotten attacked again. Or, oh my gosh, they were having military stuff go on there. So the goal here, and I really want people to know I'm not bashing Israel. I'm a Christian. I stand with Israel. I stood with Israel from the get-go. But I want people to think critically here that there are deep state infiltrates. There are people of the world order who they're trying to set up a world government based on war and wartime economics to enslave the American people, to take away the liberties that the last people had, the same liberties the Iranian people had in 1953. Are now diminished. They're gone. The 4,000-year reign of the monarchy in Iran is gone. They have no rights. And all because we chose petty rivalries or petty alliances with the British or the French or whoever, instead of looking at people as human beings and saying, well, Iran is really asking us for help here. We don't know how long this chance will last. Why don't we build a lasting relationship? Why don't we send people over and show them how to build a bridge? Why don't we send people? It's a heck of a lot cheaper, I tell you this, to send people to Iran in 53 and tell them how to build a hospital or send doctors to train a medical school over there than it is to fund a $2 trillion war in where? Afghanistan alone. Matter of fact, it got so expensive, I think we were paying somewhere around $1 million a day just for air conditioning for our bases in Afghanistan. I should know. I did a presentation on it for my degree. I found a lot of stuff that they didn't put in those college textbooks. So the Lavon affair was a covert operation, bomb Egyptian and allied buildings that were civilian targets, make it look like it was Muslims or communists or local nationalists, create a climate of fear so that who would come in? The United States. Who kept us in the war? Well, according to this, it was Pinhas Lavon, Israeli defense minister. But there's no way that the deep state can infiltrate other countries that are America's allies, right? I'm looking at France, who has now legalized the mass migrations that are coming over. All the crime that's happened in poor Paris. Oh, but the only Paris that we're concerned about here is Paris Hilton or whoever is the next big thing. So that was one incident. There is another one that I thought was interesting. The USS Liberty incident. Now, we've picked on Iran a little bit here. I think Iran's a terrible regime. I think they're a failed state. But there was a time when we could have worked with them, and that's what I want the people to grasp out there. Just like I want people to grasp that there are deep state infiltrates in our great beloved ally of Israel, who we should always stand with. But there was a time when Iran and Israel could have stood together with the United States. There was a time, and that shot has been long last. The USS Liberty incident was an attack on the United States Naval Technical Research Ship, the USS Liberty, by Israeli Air Force jet fighter aircraft and Israeli Navy motor torpedo boats on the 8th of June, 1967, during the Six-Day War. The combined air and sea attack killed 34 crew members, naval officers, seamen, 2 Marines, and 1 civilian NSA employee. It wounded 171 crew members and severely damaged the ship. At the time, the ship was in international waters north of the Sinai Peninsula, about 25 and a half nautical miles northwest of the Egyptian city of Arish. So, the events leading up to it, according to Israeli sources at the start of the war, this was, the 6 days war. On June 5th, General Yitzhak Rabin, Israeli Air Force, where have I heard that name from? All those prophecy things, right? Chief of Staff informed Commander Ernest Carl Castle, the American naval attaché in Tel Aviv, that Israel would defend its coast with every means at its disposal, including sinking unidentified ships. He asked the U.S. to keep its ships away from Israel's shore, or at least inform Israel of their exact positions. Well, let's skip some of this article. We're going to go down to the government investigations here. So, the U.S. government investigations of the Liberty attack, the court produced evidence that the Israeli armed forces had ample opportunity to identify the Liberty correctly. The court had insufficient information before it to make a judgment on the reasons for the decision by Israeli aircraft and torpedo boats to attack. It was not the responsibility of the court to rule on the culpability of the attackers, and no evidence was heard from the attacking nation. From the U.S. Defense Department's June 28, 1967 report. Let's highlight that first line. We're going to go through this report together. The court produced evidence that the Israeli armed forces had ample opportunity to identify the Liberty correctly. American inquiries, memoranda, records of testimony, and various reports mentioning the Liberty attack include, but are not limited to, and then it goes on to discuss those. That went through the attack footage, The CIA memoranda consists of two documents, one dated June 13th, 1967 and June 21st. The first memorandum, an account of the circumstances, compiled all available resources. So this was a credible investigation. The Israeli government investigations, I've already got it highlighted, but I'm going to read it off to you. In the grave situation that's been created, the only way to soften the result is for us to be able to announce to the U.S. government already today that we intend to prosecute people for this disaster. Isn't that nice? We have to publicize that Israel already tonight. It is crucial that our announcement about prosecuting those who are to blame to be publicized before, I repeat, before the publication of the American report here. So let's announce things before the American nation, it was their ship, releases their report. So let's go on to the key points here. Visibility of the American flag. How else would you identify an American ship off the coast of Egypt? The official Israeli reports say that the reconnaissance and fighter pilots and torpedo boat captains did not see any flag on the Liberty. Official American reports say that the Liberty was flying her flag before, during, and after the attack. The only exception was a brief period in which the flag had been shot down and replaced with a larger flag. The helicopter sent to the attack site to provide assistance after the air attack noticed an American flag flying from the ship almost immediately upon their arrival. The perceptions of the event. Surviving crew members of the USS Liberty say that Israel's attack on the ship was deliberate and with full knowledge that the vessel was American. Israeli investigation and history reports agree that the attack was deliberate, but against what they believed was an Egyptian vessel. The identification had told them to go after Egyptian ships. Identification markings. If you didn't see the flag, reconnaissance aircraft usually see the numbers and the letters on the side. Liberty bore an 8-foot-high number 5 and a 4-foot-high GTR along either bow, clearly displaying it was a technical research ship. It had 18-inch high letters spelling the vessel's name across her stern. These markings were not cursive Arabic script, but in the American alphabet. Israeli pilots initially said that they were primarily concerned with ensuring the ship was not an Israeli warship, and that they ended the attack when they noticed the Latin alphabet markings. The ship's identification during attack, a James Bamford book published in 2001, said that the secret NSA intercepts indicated that Israeli pilots had full knowledge they were attacking a U.S. vessel. Efforts for identification. The American crew says the attacking aircraft did not make identification runs over, looking over to make sure what ship it was before they attacked, before they ran over the Liberty, but began to strafe or fire upon it immediately. Israel says several identification passes were made. The Naval Court of Inquiry, based on the Israeli timeline of events, found one may infer from the fact that within a period of approximately 15 minutes, the requesters received a command decision made, aircraft dispatched, the attack launched, that no significant time was expended in an effort to identify the ship before the attack was launched. That was the Naval Court of Inquiry. But let me ask, who would the United States believe? Members of a foreign government or their own sailors who were there is the primary concern. So we discussed that recently a consulate was blown up. It was considered a military building. It happened in the Lavon affair too in 1954. Several incidents, matter of fact, to draw the United States into a war in the Middle East. The USS Liberty being one of it. They were hoping we would go after the Egyptians. I guarantee if the United States, if they'd have sunk the ship with no surviving witnesses, it would have been real easy for people to say, oh, the Egyptians did that. Maybe you ought to send people over here for another war. Now, as if the United States is not good enough at recognizing patterns, which I'm not pro-Iran or pro-Israel in this war. I'm against war regardless of the cost because I don't believe in innocent people dying. I don't think that's a Christian thing to believe in. We as Americans should not be sitting here arguing over who gets to live and who gets to die. Everybody is a human being created in the image and the equal right of God. And to say that somebody is lesser or somebody is worth dying, but somebody else is not, is blasphemy and defamation to the image of God. That's what I believe. And I stand with Israel because Israel is the nation that my God had created, especially for his people, released from bondage. But we have to understand that the people that God put in charge of that country are not the ones that have been running it necessarily. The deep state works in every government, in every parliament, in every schoolhouse, and everything across the world. It would be real easy for somebody named Pinhas Lavon to be in an Israeli convert to the world machine. Money talks. So does powerful positions. Look at our president. Look at other folks. So if that wasn't facetious enough, Helms, the Shah, and the CIA. This was an article put out by the CIA. There's a certain irony in the fact Richard Helms would go to Iran as the American ambassador of the organization that overthrew Tehran. However, there is nothing on the public record to show that he was personally involved with the overthrow of the communist-backed regime of, oh no, not prime minister, but premier Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. Iran is next door to the Soviet Union in 1951. Mossadegh, who confused Westerners with his habits of weeping in public and running government business from his bed, nationalized the British-owned oil company, almost like we can't give them their own oil or their own money. We can't give them compensation. We have to take the British side. The same people who did that to us. Today, the Iran to which Helms will go after he leaves the CIA is a stable, well-armed, and well-oiled financed regime under the Shah's command, which has mended its fences with Moscow without hurting its close relationship with Washington. The Shah has taken full advantage of the changes in the East-West relations from the Cold War to today's milder climate. The climate of today would not permit the United States to repeat the Iranian operation, or so one assumes with reservations that President Nixon, who is vice president of Iran, loves surprises. 50 years after the report was written. Oh, the CIA won't plan something, but our new president loves surprises. So take what I've given you today, the real funny parallels between the attacks on the consulate in Damascus, the attacks of the Lavon affair. I'm not telling you to be anti-Israel or pro-Iran. I'm simply giving you information from credible sources and encouraging you as American citizens, begging you, don't let us go to war because the deep state that's been trying to get us into a war with Iran and the end-all, be-all, Armageddon, our final stand in the Middle East will be one of victory. Think critically. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. God bless our allies and our fighting troops overseas, fighting to keep information and freedom free. It's not free otherwise. God bless you, and may the blood of Christ wash over our government. We desperately need it. Thank you.
From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godley, this is the voice of Johnson County, JOCO Community Radio.